Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a president. By the way, notice it's not to the president, it's to a president, which we're going to get into specifically. This is poem number 10 of the 29 of By the Roadside. Here, as we've said about our Whitman and the 5 Ps, and one of those being politician, here we're going to see Whitman as a politician. 2 times actually in By the Roadside we're going to see Whitman playing this game of being a political critiquer. Some have called this one of the nastiest poems in all of Leaves of Grass. He will be here talking about James Buchanan, the president from 1857 to 1861, and he'll call Buchanan elsewhere the weakest of the president's tribe. So, you know, we're going to look at this as maybe an attempt at a sustained political theodicy, as we have, used that term in the past with our Big Five. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt. Everything from the inscriptions. We gave an introductory set of comments to By the Roadside, and we just finished with Oh Me, Oh Life. I find it fascinating the way that Whitman constructed and ordered these poems in the final of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. Now, Norton's will tell us that this poem began as one of the messenger leaves of Leaves of Grass 1860 and remained unchanged. The president addressed is obviously James Buchanan, who at this time represented to the poet a Democratic failure, soon to be redeemed by Abraham Lincoln. And after we do drum taps and get to Memories of Lincoln, we'll be talking more at length about why is it that Whitman was so into Lincoln? What is it about Lincoln that made him so proud, so excited, worthy of celebration? And one of the things is, well, Lincoln and Buchanan are quite radically different individuals, obviously different politicians entirely. The truth of the matter is that the thing that probably most upsets Whitman about Buchanan is his inability to solve the problem that probably nobody could have solved at the time, and obviously it was the problem of slavery, which would ultimately culminate in the Great War. For Whitman, I think he really was troubled by the fact that we couldn't find a leader who would solve the problem and just bring everyone together. And of course, Lincoln is going to be the great advocate for unity, but he's going to do it through strength, obviously. By the way, Whitman wrote of Buchanan in his 2 previous presidents. He called them deformed, mediocre, sniveling, unreliable, false-hearted men. Ouch. So let's maybe see what kind of tone we're going to play with here in president. By the way, you'll maybe remember in starting from Paumanok number 2, he says, I will make a song for the ears of the president. Go back and look at what we had to say about that in starting from Paumanok. And here we're going to hear the word you used 4 times, and it is direct. You know how we talk about this direct address? Sometimes we're going to play that game. Now, of course, Whitman loves the word all, and that's the word that he's going to begin with. All you are doing and saying is to America dangled mirages. You have not learned of nature, of the politics of nature. You have not learned the great amplitude, rectitude, impartiality. You have not seen that only such as they are for these states, and that what is less than they must sooner or later lift off from these states. Well, there's actually some very interesting philosophy that's being played here, and as we get into this, we'll kind of try to identify it. One of the things I love about these little poems that so many often will just kind of bypass as being, kind of a waste of time, I want to make the argument that we've seen some of this similar kind of voice already in Leaves of Grass, this accusatory, direct, accusatory kind of voice. Notice he begins with the word all. In other words, there isn't anything, Mr. President, that you are doing that I'm going to approve of. All you are doing. Notice it's not we are doing. This is one of those moments in Leaves of Grass where it isn't about unity at all. It's more about singling out an individual and saying, you are the problem. All you are doing and saying is to America. And I've told you guys this when we did I Hear America Singing early on in the in the inscription section. I said anytime Whitman uses the word America in Leaves of Grass, and he does it a number of times, but anytime he does it, it's significant. We want to pay attention to it. Notice here he says, all you're doing and saying is to America dangled mirages. You'll remember this dangled when we get by, you'll hear it again when we get to by Blue Ontario Shores, number 12, passage 12. The word mirages we'll see in passage to India 3. In other words, you are ruining America by not giving us an appropriate understanding of reality. Dangled mirages. Of course, let's be fair, philosophically, he's going back to Plato's Republic 7, right? In the cave allegory and looking at shadows on a wall. We've given full lectures about this at learnstrong.net. You have not learned of nature. Do notice it's capitalized, and immediately we'll think of course, Emerson's classic essay, Nature, of which Whitman knew well. You have not learned of nature, and then notice the use of the dash, as we've seen so regularly in Leaves of Grass, of the politics of nature. Now that is interesting. The politics of nature? What is he talking about? Well, I think standing behind so much of Whitman as politician is his love for that precious document, the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal nature to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. That's Jefferson's view. That's a deist. The laws of nature and nature's God. That is to say, pre-Darwin, we got to put that in our notes, pre-Darwin, we're going to have a Whitman that argues that if you study nature, capital N, you're going to have a certain view of politics which will align with his democratic view of politics. Now, of course, it's going to be a whole line of thinkers from Darwin to Marx to Hegel to Nietzsche to any number of other thinkers that will say, are you so sure this is what nature teaches us politically about what's going on in the world? But here, notice, you've not learned the great, and then he has three, right? Amplitude, rectitude, impartiality. Amplitude, you'll remember from Song of Myself 20. Rectitude, you'll remember from Song of the Rolling Earth number 3. You can run that one to ground. And then also from Song of the Rolling Earth number 3, you'll see the word impartiality. And in fact, rectitude and impartiality are set in a line there in that poem, and we've dealt with that already. But what is it that he's saying? Well, amplitude and then rectitude and impartiality are all about inclusivity. In other words, you do not understand, Mr. President, that your job is to bring us together, not to create divisions. And of course, in the history of American political thought, right up to the present day, this has always been one of those really disheartening elements of American democracy. We never quite can seem to find a way to see each other eye to eye. Politically speaking, we've always got these divisions among us, and Whitman was deeply disturbed by this. Of course, he knew what was coming, obviously, right? You have not seen, again, the idea of sight by the roadside and what you can see. We'll get to that same idea in I Sit and Look Out here in the next poem in a few minutes. You have not seen that only such as they, the antecedent to the pronoun they is amplitude, rectitude, impartiality, or in a single word, democracy, right? You have not seen that only such as they are for these states. Notice capitalized both times, the last word of the poem is states. These states, and that what is less than they must sooner or later lift off from these states. And it's an interesting phrase, lift off from these states. Like, what exactly is he saying? Well, he is saying that democracy is going to trump Buchanan. In other words, we will find a way. Now, of course, we did find a way, and tragically it involved an American Civil War, as Abraham Lincoln will call it at Gettysburg. The idea that we're going to have to fight this terrible, horrific war to be able to get to that amplitude, rectitude, impartiality is for Whitman something he was hoping to avoid, which many have read Leaves of Grass is in the end specifically about that. Let's try to avoid that at all costs. Well, how are we going to finish a poem like this at 2A? Well, I think major theme here is that America will be only great if it is democratic, impartial in every way. And if we don't have leaders that lead us towards that, he will say, there's something fundamentally wrong with you, not with the country. And of course, how does he know all of this? His study of nature. That is to say, the rules of nature, the laws of nature, and that kind of thing. At 2B, I would point out that this is the direct address that we've often seen. Notice, right to a person of tremendous political power in Buchanan, I would argue that a poem like this is part of a sustained political theodicy, and I think that stood behind a whole lot of Whitman's project by the end of his life. He needed to explain why must there have been a terrible civil war. Of course, serving as nurses, we'll get to when we do drum taps later. He saw the worst imaginable human suffering. And why is all this? Well, one place he could go, and I think this is why this poem stays in Leaves of Grass, is, well, we didn't have the right leadership. With the right kind of leadership, and that's why we'll have a special section, Memories of Lincoln, with the right kind of leadership, we would not be having these kinds of problems. It is the lack of leadership that has led us to this place. And of course, there's a whole lot of readers of history that say, man, I don't know who you could have put, Buchanan or anybody else, in this situation. I mean, look, Lincoln couldn't keep the civil strife from happening. Right? At 3A, I mentioned Emerson's nature. Obviously, Thoreau's Walden comes to mind as well. And Thoreau's belief that there are things that can be learned from nature, capital in nature, right? I mentioned Jefferson's Laws of Nature and Nature's God from the Declaration of Independence. I just want to set you up, though, for this study of the last poem of Roadside to the States and the 16th, 17th, 18th president, where he will, in fact, use the phrase, filthy president. So, I mean, his political bellicosity will be played out at the very end of By the Roadside, and we'll come back to it, and we'll make the connection back to this poem. Finally, at 3B, I think that there is a way to read Leaves of Grass as a literary text, but there's certainly a way to read Leaves of Grass as well as a political text. And it can lead to questions like the following. Do you believe that we can learn our politics from nature in the study of nature? And for you, who has been the best and the worst president? And why? What is it that leads you to say, for example, here, Buchanan is such a terrible president, filthy. He even uses the word. Well, why? Like, what exactly is it that makes a great leader as opposed to a not so great leader? And this takes us obviously back to our study of Plato's Republic as well as Machiavelli's Prince. We've given full lectures on that there. Well, I hope that a poem like this is for you not a throwaway poem. I hope it challenges you to think about your own political proclivities. Thank you.